Awesome. Awesome. Well, hello everybody who's checking out this video in the Facebook group. If you saw some of the technical difficulties that Hope and I had while we were trying to figure out the Facebook Live, we are recording this and then posting it at a later time so you guys can catch it later. But Hope, thank you so much for agreeing to do an interview and just to talk about your blog post as you were a contributor this week. And first of all, I just want to start with just an introduction. Can you let us know a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me, Daniel. And so I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a private practice in Asheville, North Carolina. And I started my career in Wilmington, Delaware, and moved to Asheville in 2011. When I started my career, I was a director of a children's shelter for 4 years. And so I had lots of experience with systems and organization and managed staff. I think it was 11 people. It was 20% facility. So I learned a lot and had a lot of experience with creating forms and doing documentation and making sure everything was to code.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah, and then let's see, what else can I tell you about myself? I have a undergraduate degree in interpersonal and organizational communication, and that has really served me well. And yeah, so I'll tell you more if it comes up.
Can you explain a little bit more about that degree? Because I might have some ideas of what that is, but I've never heard of that. So I'd love to just know a little bit more what that means.
Sure. So the class that kind of caught my attention, I took it as an elective class, was conflict resolution. And that was in the interpersonal communication side of the degree. And then I took classes on the organizational side because it was like a blended degree. And I learned all about corporate culture and the direction that business was heading. I graduated in 91, and I remember my professor, Beth Hazlitt, said, you know, when you all are working, you're going to end up being home-based and you'll be using the internet. And at that point, you know, we weren't all using the internet in the way that we are now, dial up,
Yeah.
and, you know. And so it's just an interesting thing to see that come to fruition. But yeah, so I learned about corporate culture, public relations. It touched a little on marketing, but kind of structuring organizations, and also on the interpersonal side, like conflict resolution and systems theory and communication.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. And how has that led you to the organized therapist and what you're doing today? Did you get that? Hello?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I think it might have cut out for a sec there.
Yeah. So I guess the way that I came about developing the organized therapist stemmed more out of my own private practice experience. When I went fully into private practice, I was no longer experiencing the pressures of external motivators like a supervisor, an agency, a paycheck, formal policies and procedures. And so it was interesting because at the same time that I started my private practice, I was also contracting with an agency, and I was seeing far less clients with the agency than I was with my private practice, but I was finding that I was giving more attention to the agency paperwork and organization. And I really started noticing, like, hey, I'd better work on my own internal motivation and start giving attention to my private practice.
Yeah.
Of course, I wasn't letting it completely go into chaos, but I was noticing things. And so I had overestimated my abilities that I had, working in the shelter and being an outpatient clinical supervisor and, all the positions I've had over the years. And I overestimated my abilities and underestimated the workload of private practice. I thought, oh, this is easy. I can do this. I've done all of this before.
Right.
It started piling on. And then I thought, well, if this has happened to me, then surely it has happened to other people. And
Absolutely.
I think that is the case based on my interactions with other therapists in private practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I speak from, I'm not a therapist myself, but my wife is. And so I've seen her growth over the last 5, 6 years and how she, went from starting out, and then you kind of take on this task and then this task and then this task. And it seems like there's this constant trying to keep up or to-do lists or getting back to this person who inquired about your services and that sort of thing. So I totally get that and totally see that.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, absolutely. As with any business. And
Sure.
I was reading through the blog post that you submitted as a guest contributor, and I was like, I can see myself in this post in my own business, in my own way of thinking for sure.
Yeah.
And can you expand a little bit upon, you mentioned this way of thinking, this circle back around. Can you just take us through that? Like what is that way of thinking, and how can it hurt somebody who's trying to build a private practice?
Yeah, so it can be hurtful or helpful depending on whether or not it's mindfully used. So
Right.
circling back around in the way that may be hurtful is, let's say a client comes in and they have a $5 copay, or let's say it's even a $50 copay, and they pay you in cash, and there's no system to log the copayment, and you think, I'll remember, I'll circle back around and I'll put this in, I'll log this into my system or into my EHR or into my calendar, or whichever way you do it. Or if you have no system, you'll just rely on remembering. And so then you think, I'll circle back around to that. And then you walk out the door, and then a friend calls and you talk to them on the way home, or, something happens and it interrupts your thinking, and then you don't remember. And then the following week, when the client comes in and you're like, did they pay last week or did they not pay last week? Because you might not have a system for requiring that they pay every time. And then it's too embarrassing to say to the client, hey, did you pay last week? And before you know it, you're losing money or you're losing credibility. And so that kind of circling back around is probably not the best idea.
Right.
The kind of circling back around that's systematic, and it's based in a plan and based in like, okay, so I'm gonna like jot down these things that I need to do, and then I circle back around to those things, maybe in a time batching way or on a to-do list kind of way. That's the kind of circling back around that would be helpful.
Yeah, I hear you. I kind of got a little anxious just hearing you like describe not having a system, because there are certain things that I've learned myself, and my wife has learned too, of you spend so much mental energy when you don't have a system, and it can really suck the life out of you and your joy in your business.
Yes,
For sure.
very.
So how did you go from that sort of disorganized, circling back around in the hurtful way, to being more organized, having more joy, more focus, all that? How did you start to make that transition?
So the part that I focused on in the blog was, delegating out, letting go of this hoarding of responsibilities, thinking I can do it all and I'll be able to circle back around and I'll be able to get to that.
Yeah.
And, go ahead and figure out ways that you can collaboratively work with someone you hire, or maybe a therapist friend, or, anybody. Work with your clients, let them have some of the responsibility, if there's something that you're taking on that maybe they could do instead, like calling their insurance company. delegate out, and then that creates space for you to then do the content work that you need to do in your practice. So that's one of the ways that has helped me. Another way of making space for myself was developing good habits. So, you know, there's systems, there's routines, and there's habits, there's projects, you know, there's different ways of categorizing, you know, what we have to do in our practice. And so habits have been very, very helpful. This may cover a couple of questions that you have kind of all in one shot.
Yeah.
So what I did was developed a system where you do one habit per month. So I've been actually doing one habit per month myself, and I've been very strategic about the habits I'm choosing. And one of them, I'll show you, I created a session agenda, and that was my first habit that I did in January. And I actually have it here taped in a very in-person way onto my planner. And so, you know, it's so very basic that it's easy to follow. I mean, it's this basic: greet client, receive patient session note, which is something I use. I have a note in my waiting room for clients to complete, and it lists their symptoms and if there's any medication changes. So, you know, that's another way that I'm keeping up with things. Set my timer, notice the start time of the session, because that's something that insurance companies want. I use a timer. It's called a time timer. And look at the billing page in my EHR, schedule the next session if they're a regular client, start the note, and do a periodic review treatment plan, and then review the patient session note that they've completed in the waiting room. And by doing that one habit, it has been so far-reaching because it covers so many things. And rather than me counting on the circling back around, I'm actually doing it in that agenda.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? Yeah. And so it's so easy to kind of let the client come in and let them kind of lead the session with whatever it is that's presenting for them that week. But for their sake, for the sake of client care, and for my sake, taking 2 minutes to follow this agenda saves hours and hours, and you know, improves my sleep and improves the quality of my work. And it just took 30 days to really, you know, get it going. And then what I'm doing is like, so I did that in January, but then I'm stacking another habit onto that. And before you know it, you have 6 habits, and then you have 12 habits. And if there's a strategy in picking which habits you do, then, you know, it can save so much time and energy and money, right?
Yeah.
And quality of life and family time.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing to think about, you know, just it's so simple, but like you said, it's so far reaching. Like it takes a lot of the mental stress out of it. And I would think too that as your clients continue to come, they know exactly what to expect, you know, as far as your agenda, and they're used to how that all goes. So even the time that they're there with you, they also know what to expect as well. It even takes some probably anxiety off of their shoulders too, I would think.
Right. Oh yeah. And they're appreciating the usefulness of it. And then we're also working on habits that they can develop for those who are living their lives that way.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, what are some of the other habits that you're also incorporating? I'm just curious.
So doing notes in 24 hours, looking at my finances every day in a different way, like kind of working with my finances for 5 minutes, doing Wunderlist, Have you ever heard of Wunderlist?
I have. I haven't used it, but I've heard of it.
Oh, I just love it. You can do links in there, like hyperlinks. You can do uploading of documents. You can message within the item with another person if
Hmm.
you're sharing it. You can set reminders. It makes a nice little ding when you hit the completed, and
That's great.
you can recycle the completed list, like if you're doing a grocery list, so that it pops back up in the incomplete.
Mm.
So anyway, I'm using Wunderlist, and that was one of my habits. So use Wunderlist for 5 minutes a day, and again, it's so far reaching because if you're in the habit of using a to-do list that you like,
Hmm.
um, then you're more likely to do your tasks, to be intimately involved with your tasks and responsibilities, rather than this idea of circling back around in the default way that
Yeah.
really doesn't work.
Yeah.
Remember to do that. It's so important. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, what if somebody is in sort of that, they're in that mode of circling back around, it's not working, they're feeling stressed out, they're starting to get burned out. What do you say is like step number one to start working towards this more empowered habit building flow?
Right. So I would say two things. Step one would be pick a habit and strategically pick it to kind of address some of the most problematic issues that are really keeping you up at night, or sucking the time and space. Another thing, now I remember. The other thing that I would say is start now. Um,
Yeah.
now doing what you want to do so that whatever is undone, I hate using falling behind, and I'll be talking about that in the coming months, but um, rather than things, focusing on what isn't complete, um, before you know it, you'll be in the flow of doing things in the moment, and then you can make the incomplete tasks a project, and then
Mm.
you can tackle that in a systematic way.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's actually something that's been helpful for me. I have ideas all the time, or I think I've got to get to this thing, but it might not be the most important thing right now. So
Right.
I use Asana for
Mhm.
managing projects and tasks and stuff, and so I've got a whole project in there that's just a list of, call it my pile up zone, where it's just like
Yeah.
stuff piles up, and then I have a specific time each week that I kind of go in and say, okay, I can tackle that this week.
Right. Yeah, so I created a form, that's an interesting thing. This is not meant to be used for the long term. It's kind of for the purpose of creating new neural pathways, but it's called the low-hanging fruit to-do list. And I don't know if you can see it.
I can see the ladder and the apples, but I can't see.
Right. And
Oh,
then
there
on
we
this
go.
side, there's the
Ah, okay.
lines,
Yep.
right? So on the lines, you just kind of do a brain dump of your to-do list items.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so the low hanging fruit is at the bottom, and that's really easy to do. Then you have the harder to reach fruit, and then you have the, hard to reach fruit, and you have the ladder going up to that. And so what I do is I write down all of my lists or my items, and then I draw, like in primary school, lines to
Yeah.
which the fruit that it is. And there are some organizer
Great.
people who will say tackle the hardest thing the first thing in the morning. But I think it's a more dynamic and complex process than just doing the hardest thing every morning. Some
Yeah.
mornings you don't feel well. Some mornings the family is chaotic, family like getting ready for
Yeah.
school. And so some days you might just be able to do one piece of low hanging fruit. Right?
Yeah.
Or some days you wake up extra energized, you have really good coffee, and you're able to do the more difficult task. So anyway, I am using this as a way to kind of develop a way of thinking about how to pick which thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like an outward, external exercise that hopefully will go, take its place inside. And so the ladder then is where you might write the steps for what needs to be done to climb the ladder to get to the
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. That's great. I love that. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, as we're wrapping up our little interview here, you had mentioned to me that you started a habit. What did you call it? A habit challenge?
Yeah.
Could you
So,
tell us a little more about that and how people can get involved?
yeah, so it's actually closed for now. We started it at the end of the year, and a couple of people did it at the beginning of the year, started. But it's, pick a habit per month for 12 months, so for 2018. But I'm going to be doing one next year, and also I'm working on doing a kind of a group project on, or an online course on habits. So look for that.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
And
really excited about it because, it's not just doing the habits, it's strategically choosing the habits. And so there's a whole
yeah.
deconstruction of the practice before choosing the habits that will be helpful.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Well, how can people find you online and start to organize their life and develop these habits?
Yeah. So I'm in 3 places: the Organized Therapist Facebook group, the Documentation Support Group for Mental Health Professionals, and the Training Resource Group for Mental Health Professionals. And I created that as a way to find trainings. I was finding myself like, where was that training that I saw? And then I'd be like doing searches on Facebook and trying to find some obscure blog post or training, and I was having a hard time. So this is a place where, I'm trying to find anything that's a learning opportunity and making posts and then putting little keywords in the Facebook posting so that people can do a search in one place.
Cool. That's great.
That, and of a training, just send me a post.
Well, that's awesome. That's great. You're making lives and practices much easier for a lot of people. That's really cool.
Thanks.
And so I'll put this recording of this video in the Facebook group, and then maybe if you can add those links in there, and then people can join those groups and get the support that they need.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for contributing a blog post to the Create My Therapist website blog. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. Have a great day.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Thanks.